The whole day was very chaotic. I don't know if this happens in other industries. This week was literally life-changing. I experienced total burnout. And hello everyone, my name is Surina and I'm a junior doctor coming to you still from quarantine in Australia. I started this YouTube channel about a year ago, and one of my first proper videos was a reflection of the first year of being a doctor. So it only felt right that a year later I would reflect on what's been a very quick 2 years, especially as I've got a lot of time in quarantine to reflect at the moment. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. First up is you grow into your growth. Basically, hospitals are very much run on hierarchy, and you really have to act up to the title that you have. So you go from being an F1, which everyone knows is the most junior doctor, to then being this all-encompassing SHO pretty much the next day. I'll never forget the first day of this year where I was the SHO for a new ward, new patients, and it was just me and the new F1 for whom it was her first day of being a doctor ever. And we were just alone on this ward, didn't know anything, and I found literally from the previous week where I was following orders from consultants and going by their plans, suddenly I was expected to do a ward round by myself and come up with management plans by myself as well, which was such a huge jump, and I was terrified of even suggesting a new medication or changing a dose, and pretty much got nothing done. The whole day was very chaotic. Eventually a consultant did arrive and we somehow got ourselves through the day. In the weeks and months that followed, I found that I was doing more independent ward rounds by myself and making management plans and trusting my management plans as well. And it's just a really nice feeling when you come up with a plan that you think makes sense, discuss it with a senior and they don't really change anything, so you know you're kind of on the right line. There was no way that at any point I felt ready to step up with these responsibilities, but as it was just expected of me, I kind of had to take them on and grow into those expectations. This realization has been so powerful in other parts of my life. For example, this YouTube channel, starting on day 0 with absolutely no idea of how to do YouTube or having the necessary skills you need for it, but having the faith in myself that I can take it in my stride and I can pick up things along the way and eventually start to trust myself as well. It's worth saying that as far as being a doctor is concerned, if things ever really hit the fan, there is always a senior to talk to. You can always escalate it to someone who has more experience than you. But it's also really cool to look back on and reflect at how on day 1 I was so scared to make even the smallest alterations, and then by the end I can make reasonable management plans for pretty much a whole ward of patients. Yeah, but continue as consultant review isn't really a plan. Shh. Next up is you can't be what you can't see. If any of you have watched my Why I Want to Be a Surgeon YouTube video, then you know that this year was pretty revolutionary in terms of confronting my speciality choices. I hadn't really entertained the idea of being a surgeon much during medical school because it didn't really feel like a space that I could occupy. I went to theatre a fair amount during medical school, but I had literally never seen a female surgeon operate, like even once. So when I did my elective in Fiji, which was surgical, that's when I started getting interested in surgery. But what really sealed the deal was a taster week I did towards the beginning of this year in breast surgery. This week was literally life-changing because I spent the whole week with a female consultant and registrar, watching them operate and run clinics, and as an absolute bonus, they were both South Asian as well. The actual surgical knowledge and experience that I gained from this week was useful, but what was absolutely mind-blowing was seeing surgeons that look like me occupying this space, because it really gave me the courage and reassurance that I could too. I've heard this phrase, you can't be what you can't see, before, but I didn't really appreciate the power of it until I did this week in breast surgery. And going forward, I'll never underestimate how powerful it is to have role models and mentors. Next up is you can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Now, I was really hoping I wouldn't have to think or talk about COVID in this year's reflection, because I did in my last year's video, but last year was nothing compared to what we all went through the second time round. Although COVID did affect my first year, it wasn't until our second wave in my second year during the winter where I really found it affected my mental and professional well-being quite significantly. Around February of this year, when we were coming to the end of that horrific second wave, I experienced total burnout. I was totally shattered from the never-ending on-calls on the COVID rota, from seeing patients struggling for their lives on a daily basis, really young patients as well, literally struggling to breathe right in front of you. I was just going from work to home, back to work robotically, and often not even being able to talk about the things that I was seeing because I just wanted to shut it out once I got home. It was a horrible time, but it really reinforced how important it is to put your well-being first for the good of yourself and for the good of your patients as well. This was put to the test almost immediately soon after, when I received some personal sad news of the passing of my grandparents, both of them in quite quick succession. I felt so guilty taking time off to be with my family and to process it myself, because even though I knew I needed the time off, you know how overstretched the wards are and how dire the staffing situation can be sometimes, and you feel like you are adding to the pressure by stepping away from all of that. But this year has really increased my resilience, not to deal with higher pressure situations, I think that happens throughout medicine, but more the resilience to preserve and prioritise your own well-being. A big shout out to my hospital for being so very understanding during those periods that I needed time off. Despite the pressures they were facing, they were very clear that my well-being was a priority, and it was probably such a small thing for them to extend those thoughts and wishes to me, but it's something I will literally never forget, which leads me quite nicely onto my next point. The little things aren't that little. In my last video, where I discussed why I was leaving the NHS this year, I did touch briefly on the shortcomings of the system as a whole, and how there are lots of little things that really add up and make the work environment quite unpleasant at times. This includes things like having seniors talking down to you, which doesn't happen often, but it does, and members of staff talking to you like you're a child. I don't know where this infantilizing culture came from in the NHS, but I've been in many instances where I've been shouted at for the strangest things, like opening the wrong door or not having a discharge summary ready while I'm literally still doing the ward round. And it's really bizarre because it seems that people forget that you are an adult person and a professional, and they talk to you in such a condescending way, because obviously I've only got experience of the NHS, but it seems to be something a lot of my colleagues have experienced as well, so I really don't know where that's coming from. Other things include having to battle with the rota coordinator just to get some time off because of how short-staffed the wards are, and not having out-of-hours facilities for when you're doing on-call shifts, like rest facilities or access to food. In their own right, these are all quite small things, but like I said, they really do add up and they make your work environment not a very pleasant place to be. The reason I bring these things up is not to spread negativity or put people off, but it's because these things are so easily rectifiable that I think it's worth mentioning, especially as my colleagues and my peers, we are going to be the seniors and the clinical directors, etc. of the future, so we can change the work environment and atmosphere in the way that we lead as leaders. None of the things I've mentioned are about how much we get paid or the hours that we have to work, which is something I think other people think doctors are always complaining about. They really are, I think, the basic things required for an enjoyable workplace and something that we can actually change. I mean, better pay would be good as well. Finally, ending on a bit of a lighter note, teaching teachers. I think in my last reflections video I spoke about lifelong learning and how that's such a huge part of this career, but this year in particular was a big year in terms of teaching. The year kicked off with me running a session for the new F1 doctors who were about to start work, teaching them all the little tips and tricks we had picked up in a year of working. Then I went back to my old university and taught the new clinical medical students the basics of how to be on the wards and how to examine patients. And then I became a clinical supervisor, teaching clinical medical students on the wards in what we call bedside teaching. Teaching is one of my favourite and most rewarding parts of being a doctor, and it's something I definitely want to implement throughout my career. It's the ultimate mutually beneficial contract, because as you get more senior and you're learning more and more things, you do start to forget the basics, which are so important throughout. So if you are still teaching some juniors, those things keep ticking over in your own mind as well, which means it helps your knowledge too. Plus, it is so satisfying watching juniors who were where you were once and watching them become more confident. It's just very wholesome. So yeah, I hope to continue teaching on different platforms, in person, at the bedside, online, and through this channel, of course. That's everything on my mind for now. It was certainly a very big year. I'm sure I'll think of more things later, but I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.